Welcome to Doc NYC's Spring Showcase, our mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. My name is Murtada Elfadl. I'm a senior programmer at Doc NYC, and it is my pleasure to be speaking with the team of number one on the call sheet, Black Leading Men in Hollywood from Apple TV+. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you.
Datari, maybe we can start with you and tell us about where the idea for this documentary came from and why you wanted to make it. And then if you can also tell us a little bit about why you wanted to do two parts, one for men and one for women.
Thank you. Yeah, it was an idea that started a long time ago. I mean, I really started thinking about it around 2017, 2018. I've been in the business a long time. I've made a lot of movies and I would always see, Black actors have these really high moments where they come out the gate and they're like, the leading man or in like 3 movies in a row. And then, 5 years later, they're like doing a TV show. And I would always wonder what happened. Like, why couldn't they sustain it? Why didn't they stay a leading man? And, if you've been in the business as long as I have and Reggie and, the people, part of this team, we've just seen, we don't get the, what's the word I'm searching for? Like, if we make a mistake, a lot of times it's just that. You don't get
no second chance.
Don't get the same level of patience, like as white talent gets. And so, a lot of us come in this business, we're first generation successful in our families. We don't have mentors. And the idea was really just to do something that could serve as a blueprint for future generations. And so I started putting materials together. I talked to Reggie about it, asked him if, what he thought about the idea. I think I sent him a deck early on. He loved the idea. I then went to Jamie, who, when we started, wasn't actually officially my partner. And he loved the idea. And then and then I brought on Kevin and we put this team together, and one of the executives at Apple, who was a really dear friend of mine at the time, said, I will put the room together. I'll get Zach and Jamie on the pitch. And we pitched it as a team collectively, me, Reggie, Kevin and Jamie, and Brian Smiley, Kevin's partner at the time. And they bought the movies, and it was very important for us to do the woman's film. And I think maybe the last, 5 minutes of the, of the pitch, I was like, well, you got to do the woman's too. We got to do them both. And they agreed. And here we are.
Yeah. Reginald, I wanted to ask you about the theme of this documentary, because one of the first things that we hear is you explaining to Denzel off camera what being number one on the call sheet is. So can you tell us, as coming in as a director, what did you see the theme of this documentary?
Several years ago, I did a documentary also for Apple about Sidney Poitier called Sidney. And, Sidney is the alpha. He's the big bang. All of us stand on his shoulders. Yeah. And even having done that film, I kept thinking, maybe there needs to be sort of a companion piece to kind of, chart the journey of his sons and daughters, right, in the business. And so when Datari and Jamie and Kevin came with this idea, I'm like, oh, I've been wanting to do this, of course. And it just showed up on my front door. So I was very grateful and very excited because, when you track these milestones in history, you have to kind of see where you are. And, there's always articles and stories about, here are the struggles of the Black whatever, filmmaker, astronaut, what have you. But how about telling the whole story, the successes, how those successes happened, how people even define success? Let's tell a more nuanced, detailed version of where we are in Hollywood.
Yeah. And I like that you said, let's talk about the successes because your career is also included in this because you are not just the director, but you are on camera talking about the heyday of Black films in the 90s. So can you tell us a little bit about that, about how you incorporated yourself into this larger story while also maintaining the scope of it all to encompass all these other amazing talents?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a tricky film to make, right? Because there's not an inherent natural narrative, right? It's a bunch of amazing high achievers telling their personal story. But, how do you organize those stories? You can do it thematically, you can do it historically. And also, at least for speaking for myself, when I make movies like this, I think about my kids who may not know these people, may not care who these people are, and most importantly, don't have the historical context. So I said, well, if we explain, here's each era, here's how the era made these stars, and here's how these stars transformed the era, right? So now there is a narrative and we can follow it and we go, oh, that's how we got from Sidney Poitier to Fred Williamson to Eddie Murphy to Denzel Washington. Now I get the evolution. So it seemed to make sense. And as for me doing it, well, I mean, I lived it and I was available. So it really wasn't that much deeper than that.
He was very reluctant to do it. Like we had to have some real persuasion going on to get him to actually, go on camera and talk about it. But as Reg said, there aren't that many people that were there through this entire, journey of the last 30 years and can actually talk about it in firsthand, give a firsthand account of what actually happened. And so it was after much arm twisting, he acquiesced.
I'm glad you are on screen. And one of the things, and you mentioned also the historical context, and one of the things that really struck me about this film is the necessity of these actors, these amazing people that we see on screen to also be social advocates. And we see that in the historical archival footage with Sidney Poitier, with Harry Belafonte, but we also see it up to just a couple of years ago with Michael B. Jordan. So can you talk about sort of bringing that sort of social justice advocacy as a theme into the film? And was it organic? Did it come from the people you talked to, or was it something you always wanted to include?
Well, I just knew it was an integral part of who these people were. And I mean, I think there's, for any successful person in the Black community, there's a sense of expectation of like, well, you're not just in it for yourself, are you? I mean, what are you going to do for the community? How are you giving back? And giving back is a very broad concept, right? And some people do it very publicly, some people do it privately. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's advocacy. Sometimes it's helping young people, and that's part of the idea of the range. There's a lot of ways to make a difference. All these people feel the importance of that and the need for that. They recognize how people help them. They all want to pay it forward, but there's a lot of different ways to do that. So it's as organic a part of the film as any conversation about any other aspect of their career or their life.
Sometimes also too, there's eras, some of these eras were defined by what was going on also in the world. I mean, you just mentioned a couple of years ago when Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd thing happened, that was a moment in time where Hollywood was, that the runway got a little bigger for a second, where they were like, okay, we need to hire more Black executives. We need to green light more, movies starring Black people. In these moments like that, you look at the 90s, that run and everything. The Rodney King thing happened early on, and Spike put it at the beginning of Malcolm X, right? And so it sort of goes in those moments like that, like it does sort of create briefly, opportunity for us to get some of these stories off the ground. I don't know if we sold this movie at the height of the George Floyd protests, like when all of that stuff was going on. I don't know if Apple, gives us the generous budget that they gave us or makes both of these movies like as quickly had we tried to pitch it today, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. Yes. And it brings me to something I was going to save this for the end, but you brought it up. So at the end of the film, Morgan talks about this is the best time to be a Black actor, to be Black in Hollywood or in the industry. So as executives, as artists working there, what's your point of view about that? And how did you sort of add that to the, try to show that in the film? Because not everybody agreed with Morgan in the movie.
Well, I mean, I think it is the best time in terms of the progress that's been made. That doesn't mean there's still not a long way to go. It just means that where we are now, like, is a much better point than at any other point. I mean, we have a new generation of artists, and executives, like Reggie and I and Datari and Jamie, and we're really committed to telling Black stories, but telling Black stories, in an unadulterated way from our own point of view, and you have artists who are building mega companies, and these companies are dedicated to telling our stories. So I mean, we didn't have that before, and that's a critical thing in order to actually, one, like, continue this, and then two, to actually tell authentic stories.
Yeah, Morgan Freeman's right. I mean, he usually is, right, Morgan Freeman. But Simon. But I remember when I first called him about doing the film, he was, kind of like a little wary, like, "Hey, are you asking me to say something that I made?" I said, "No. I want you to say what you think. We want to hear your perspective." And he goes, "Well, things are great." And I'm like, "I agree. The fact is, in my own lifetime, in my own career as a filmmaker, I have seen extraordinary improvement and opportunity. Now, that doesn't mean that time is in a flat circle and things go backward. And I have seen collapse and I have seen regrowth. But net, again, from House Party to number one on the call sheet, things are the best they've ever been for a Black filmmaker, the best they've ever been for a Black actor. And it's really important to not obsess over failure and defeat. It's really important to acknowledge the wins, because how can you really track success if you don't honestly acknowledge everything that's happening, the good and the bad?
Yeah, I will say this as the younger statesman, not that young, but it's an interesting thing though, right? Because when I saw the New York Times cover with Reggie and Singleton and Spike and Mario Van Peebles and all these guys on it, to be honest, it is layered though. I don't, there are people that want to argue and say that the 90s was the best time, right? Because Jamie does say, like, we all had our own TV shows. We were all rich in the 90s. Like, all, like, the he had the Jamie Foxx show, Martin had Martin, Will had Fresh Prince. They all had Bentleys and Mercedes, and they had those things then, right? And then, what happens in our business is it goes away for a generation, and then it comes back, and then you have all the young people thinking that they did this for the first time. This is a little more layered than just it's better today than it was 20 years. It's a little more layered than that because, I could make a case that group of filmmakers that Reggie is on the cover with is the best group of Black filmmakers of all time. I could make that case, right? So, there is the Barry and the Kuglers but I can still make that case that that's the best generation.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's completely 100% true, Datari. But I think that the difference to me generationally now is the companies that these guys that the guys are building. The companies that you and Jamie have built, the companies that Kevin has built, the companies that The Rock has built. Like at that in that era, we didn't have that level of ambition, opportunity, whatever, to actually take their brands to an entirely different place. They're so much bigger than what anything that anyone had seen previously.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. I mean, it's what are you measuring? You can say, well, aesthetically, I prefer this era to that area, this filmmaker to that filmmaker. And, that's a totally legitimate measuring stick. I remember when I first came to Hollywood, you really could only make comedies, right? Doing a drama was a really hard thing to do. So when I was on the set of Django as a producer, I was like, I can't believe this is happening. This is an impossible thing. When I made a movie about Thurgood Marshall, Thurgood Marshall was always my childhood hero. I couldn't believe I was making a theatrical feature film about Thurgood Marshall. It was beyond my wildest dreams that could come true. So, movements don't go smooth, right? This moves forward, this moves backwards, and then there's it's still, I don't know, are we still in baby steps? Are we in adolescence? How would you actually describe this moment? Maybe we'll have to answer that question in 20 years.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really loved about this film that sort of made it special in my mind is the way these actors talk about each other. Like you'd expect Denzel to talk in awe about Sidney Poitier. We've seen him do that. So that was an expectation. But to see Will Smith, for example, say he wanted to be Eddie Murphy in Star Wars, like that, those kinds of things were new, and it sort of talk to the sort of comradeship between these actors. They don't see themselves as competitors, but as opening the door for themselves and for other people. So can you talk about sort of providing them that environment to sort of open up and be candid in a way that, you don't see everywhere else when they try to sell their movies or on TV or whatever?
Well, that's just it. Normally, they're on camera to sell a product. That is their assignment, whether they want to do it or not. And they don't get asked the question about, who are your favorites, or who inspired you. So the fact that we were just talking, just having a conversation, and those things organically would come up. That they had a great time. We collectively had a great time because it wasn't, the assignment was, let's talk like we do when there is no camera.
Saying it's just it's creating an atmosphere where people feel comfortable, and Reg is really good at creating an atmosphere where people feel comfortable, and and more importantly, like the thing that we always try to do in these things is actively listen, because if you're going to have a real conversation, you have to listen to what the other person is saying, and not just try to get out the questions that you're trying to ask. Like, okay, I got to get to these 6 questions. No, because then you miss the thing that's really the thing, that takes you in a direction to a place that you completely didn't expect. And that's where you get gold. That's where all of a sudden you find out things about these guys that you didn't want to know. And that was a big part of the objective is to find out things about these cats that you didn't know, to find out their worldviews, to find out like what they think about their families and dealing with the industry and their families, and to not see them as kind of these, two-dimensional superheroes, but to actually see them as human beings.
So I just wanted to say, you were talking, Murtada. Are you hearing me? Yes. You're talking, Murtada, about how you get these kinds of performances and stories. And I was saying there are really a couple of parts to it. One is you put Reggie in the chair and you know what he's done as a scripted storyteller. But just in the documentary space, when you think about Black Godfather and then Sydney, and then coming to this film. This is in some way the apotheosis of all of this work that he's done about history and power in Black Hollywood. And he's able to bring all that. Plus, he has personal relationships with so many of these guys. Eddie Murphy is not in that chair without Reggie's relationship with him. I can promise you that. So it creates a certain kind of comfort that allows them to speak human being to human being. And then on top of that, he has Byron's support in all of the storytelling, and they've been doing this together forever. So they're partners who have that kind of communication. And then you have Datari, who opens the door to everyone, who has the stature and the gravitas as a producer and as a power in our industry to say, we are making this film and we would love you to participate. And folks know that if it's Datari reaching out to them, it's going to get done. It's going to get done at a high level. So you combine all of those forces and you're putting folks in the right state of mind to be able to perform. And then these guys just execute at a high level.
Yeah.
And Dan as well. I mean, he's the best in class. You know, thank you for that, Dan, about us. But it really is an Avengers group of creators. Dan is the best in class in the documentary space. He's got the hardware to show that, and we just all work very well together.
And how lucky it is for us as members of the audience to see Eddie Murphy do Sidney Poitier or Lawrence Fishburne talk about working with Francis Ford Coppola. Like, the film is just full of these stories that are moving and funny, and it all comes together in this really beautiful way. But not also is the film funny and interesting and entertaining. It is also moving, because one of the moments that was really moving to me was how you got everybody to be very vulnerable about Chadwick Boseman passing. And that was a moment, obviously, if you're talking about leading men in Hollywood, you cannot talk about Chadwick Boseman. But also it comes fraught with the fact that he's not with us anymore. So can you talk a little bit about, just allowing these people to be vulnerable about that in front of your camera?
Well, everyone's still very raw over losing Chadwick. I mean, it was a terrible blow. And when he passed, everyone's phone was ringing. Everyone was calling each other. Everybody was so hurt, people bawling on the phone. And the second or third question was, did you know? Did you know? Did you know? And no one knew. And which is sort of a tribute to the loyalty of his team, that he wanted privacy, he didn't want people to know, and no one talked. Everyone respected his wishes. And I mean, I can speak for myself. I planned on working with him the rest of my life. I was like, wow, what a great start. And, he was leaving my set to go shoot Black Panther. And I had written the Black Panther comic book for many years. So the first time we met, it was just us talking for 2 hours about Black Panther. And, and Ruth Carter, who was also doing the costumes for my movie, had to leave early to go shoot Black Panther. So I went through the comic books. I'm like, see this costume design? Because I knew Black Panther was going to be a game-changing milestone movie. And it was in our collective best interest that this movie be a giant success. And anything I could do to contribute was really important. But I knew they had, a great filmmaker in Ryan Coogler, but they literally had the Black Panther. If you look at, Black Panther's original appearance in the Fantastic Four, and you look at how Jack Kirby drew him, he looks like Sidney Poitier. Yeah. And if you ask me, who is Sidney Poitier of this era? He is Chadwick Boseman, even more than Denzel. There is an inherent nobility to Chadwick Boseman that everyone knew, which is why he could play those giant roles, that he could take on Jackie Robinson and James Brown. I mean, like, who can do that? Who can play these larger-than-life historical characters? A man that has that kind of integrity, that has that kind of spirituality, that has that kind of intelligence. So when we lost him, the entire town was destroyed and still felt that way. And because of the time of year it was COVID, so we really didn't have a chance to collectively mourn. So I was like, wow, this movie gives us the opportunity for us all to express our still hurting loss over Chadwick.
Wow.
So well said. Very well said, Reggie.
It's kind of hard to move on from that because, but I want to sort of, one of the themes that sort of struck to me as the film is maybe something, Byron, you touched on earlier, is that art is a business, and these people are creating opportunities for themselves, but also for other people by, you mentioned all the companies, The Rock and Kevin Hart and Jamie and all these people have. So can you talk about bringing that into the film and making it one of the themes of this documentary?
Well, I mean, part of this was to celebrate success, and I mean, and that is the ultimate celebration, and actually seeing how these guys had plans that went beyond just being actors, and how to show that they actually, had a long-term plan to do something that was bigger, that actually touched a lot of different areas, touched a lot of different people, provided jobs for a lot more people, and to actually put out imagery into the world like that we wanted to see from Black people. And I mean, that was a huge thing. That was a mammoth, undertaking that these businesses that they created, like really, really impacted, a whole generation of people. So now, like the next generation, they see a blueprint for something that's much bigger than just being an actor. I mean, they're all taking careful possession of their brand and making sure that their brand is actually developing into something that is something that means something beyond any one particular industry.
Wow. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much to Reginald, Datari, Byron, Dan. Thank you to all of you for joining me today. I lost what I'm supposed to say. All right. You'll have to edit
Can I
this.
say one thing before we wrap? I just want to speak to the audience that's watching this. If you are watching this and you haven't watched the film, the sort of encyclopedic knowledge of Hollywood history, of Black Hollywood history that you're seeing in this conversation, check out the movie. You will never have seen something like this before. The stories are hysterically funny and deeply moving, and it's the erudition of these people and their experiences that you're going to see on the screen, and it's very rare. I hope we get to see it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you to all of you. And thank you for joining Doc NYC today. The Spring Showcase goes through June 13th.